The elevator ride to the penthouse of the Thorne Tower took exactly 4 to 5 seconds. I knew this because I had counted it 3 times, trying to calm the racing of my heart. When the doors slid open with a soft, hydraulic hiss, the air that hit me wasn't welcoming. It didn't circulate, it lingered, heavy with the scent of expensive white lilies and the cold, sterile hum of an industrial-grade cooling system that kept the temperature at a precise, unyielding 68 degrees. I stepped onto the marble floor, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness of the room. Every surface here was a statement of power, the black obsidian desk that looked like a tombstone, the floor-to-ceiling glass that turned the city's skyscrapers into tiny, flickering toys, and the silence that felt like it was pressing against my eardrums. I sat in a chair that cost more than my father's entire bakery, yet I had never felt more like a trespasser. Across from me, Serena Thorne was a study in monochromatic perfection. Her white suit was crisp enough to cut, and her hair was pulled back so tightly not a single strand dared to move. Her eyes, a pale, unforgiving gray, never moved from the document lying between us. She didn't look like a woman about to get engaged. She looked like a general signing a treaty of surrender. 12 months, Henry, she said. Her voice was a low, melodic purr that lacked even a trace of human warmth. You will be seen at my side. You will smile for the press. You will play the role of the devoted fiancé while I secure the Zeus project funding. In return, the Thorne Group will deposit $5 million into an offshore account in your name. It's a generous exit fee for a man whose greatest achievement so far is designing a community center that will never be built. I looked down at my hands. They were clean now, the nails buffed and the skin soft, but if I closed my eyes, I could still feel the grit of flour and the heat of the industrial ovens. My father had spent 40 years in a small shop in the North End, waking up at 4 a.m. to feed a neighborhood that loved him. He was a man of yeast and salt and honest sweat. And then the Thorne Group arrived. They called it urban revitalization. My father called it a death sentence. When they bulldozed his bakery to make room for a luxury parking lot, he didn't fight. He just withered away. He died 3 months later, leaving me with nothing but his old rolling pin and a burning need to build something they couldn't tear down. $5 million, I whispered. My voice sounded thin in the vast room. That money wouldn't just be an inheritance, it would be the foundation for the North End project, the sustainable housing complex I had designed to replace what the Thornes had stolen. Sign it, Serena commanded, sliding a gold-plated fountain pen toward me. And let's be perfectly clear, Henry. The moment that ink dries, you are no longer a person. You are an asset. You will speak when spoken to, you will wear what you are told, and you will forget that you ever smelled like a kitchen. You are Thorne now. Try to act like you belong here. I picked up the pen. It was heavy and cold, like a scepter made of ice. As I signed my name, I felt a phantom weight settle around my wrists. I wasn't an architect anymore. I was a prop in a silver cage. Sunday brunch at the Thorne estate was not a meal, it was a ritual of humiliation. The dining room was a cavernous space of white marble and gold leaf, where the sunlight hit the silverware with a glare that felt like an interrogation lamp. I sat at the long mahogany table, surrounded by the smell of truffle oil and old, rotting money. Eleanor Thorne, the matriarch, sat at the head of the table. She adjusted her pearls with a slow, deliberate motion, her eyes tracking every move I made with the predatory interest of a hawk watching a mouse. To her right, Julian, Serena's brother, was leaning back in his chair, a smirk playing on his face that suggested he had spent his entire morning thinking of new ways to remind me of my place. So, Henry, Eleanor began, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that hides a bitter poison. Serena tells me your family was in trade? A bakery, was it not? How fascinating. I suppose that's why you're so good at following recipes. Is that all an architect is? Someone who follows a recipe for a building. Julian let out a sharp, jagged laugh. Careful, mother. He might try to build our new corporate headquarters out of sourdough. Tell me, Henry, does it hurt? Knowing that the only reason you're sitting at this table is because my sister needed a commoner to make her look relatable to the voters. I gripped my silver fork, the metal biting into my palm. I looked at Serena. She was elegantly deconstructing a poached egg, her face a mask of bored indifference. She didn't defend me. She didn't even look up. I realized then that she didn't view these insults as attacks on her fiancé, She viewed them as a quality control test for her property. If I broke, I was a bad investment. My father was a master of his craft, Julian, I said, my voice low and steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. He built a business that fed thousands of people. He didn't need a legacy built on the debt of others. He built it on his own 2 hands. The table went silent. Eleanor's eyes narrowed until they were nothing but thin slits of blue ice. Julian's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine irritation. Hands, Eleanor echoed, as if the word itself was beneath her. In this family, Henry, we don't use our hands. We use our minds, our influence, and our names. You are here because Serena needs a man of the people to satisfy the city council's diversity requirements for the Zeus project. You are a public relations miracle, a charming little story we tell the press to make our greed look like charity. Do not mistake a seat at this table for an invitation to speak as our equal. You are a paid guest. Try to remember that while you eat our lobster. I sat through the rest of the meal in a red fog of suppressed rage. They talked over me, discussed my wardrobe upgrades as if I weren't in the room, and laughed about the quaint struggles of the working class. To them, the son of a baker was just a tool, a piece of scaffolding to be used until the building was finished, and then discarded into the trash. These 7 months, I lived as a ghost in a palace of glass. I was the silent shadow behind Serena at the opera, the handsome, nodding figure at the charity auctions, and the quiet architect who sat in the corner of the boardroom while the Thorne family carved up the city like a Thanksgiving turkey. To the world, I was the luckiest man alive, a commoner who had climbed the mountain and married the goddess. To the Thornes, I was a lucky nobody who had found a diamond in the trash. They had no idea that every night, while the penthouse was silent and Serena slept in her separate wing, I was awake. I had built a secret digital world within their own network. Using an encrypted laptop that I kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my dressing room, I was in constant communication with M, my contact at Phoenix Holdings. No one knew that the prop fiancé was actually a genius of structural finance and architectural law. I spent my nights studying the Thorne Group's financial records like they were blueprints for a failing skyscraper. I wasn't looking for growth, I was looking for the cracks. They are over-leveraged, Henry, MS message flickered on the screen one Tuesday night. The Zeus project is bleeding them dry. They've borrowed against the very ground their headquarters sits on. They think the market is a permanent upward climb, but they've built their empire on a foundation of sand. I leaned back, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. The penthouse felt colder than usual. How much of their debt is floating on the private market? I typed back. Nearly 40%. If someone were to consolidate those loans, they wouldn't just be an investor. They would be the landlord. Start the acquisition, I commanded. Use the patents I filed last year as collateral. I want every mortgage, every high-interest loan, every scrap of paper that gives the Thorne family power over this city. I want it all. They think they own me because I signed a piece of paper. They don't realize I'm about to own the very floor they walk on. The sound of a door clicking open made me snap the laptop shut and shove it under the bed. Serena was standing in the doorway, her hair down, looking tired but still dangerously beautiful. "Why are you still awake?" she asked, her voice suspicious. "Just thinking about the North End," I lied, my heart racing. "The community center. I was looking at some old sketches." She let out a short, dismissive breath. "Still obsessing over that dusty little corner of the world? Henry, you really must learn to let go of the past. Tomorrow, we have the meeting with the Yamamoto group. Wear the charcoal suit. And for God's sake, try to look like a man who belongs in a boardroom, not a kitchen." She turned and left without a second word. I sat in the dark, listening to her footsteps fade away. She thought she was the one holding the leash. She didn't realize that I was already rewriting the rules of the game. The 6-month mark of our engagement was treated by the Thorne PR team like a national holiday. To the public, we were the golden couple, the ice queen who had found her heart in a humble architect. To me, it was just another day of wearing a mask that was starting to chafe against my skin. We were scheduled for an exclusive sit-down interview with Elite magazine in the penthouse. The photographer spent an hour adjusting the lighting to make sure the diamond on Serena's finger caught every spark of the sun. Serena sat close to me, her hand resting on my knee. To anyone watching, it looked like a gesture of affection. To me, it felt like a bird of prey pinning down its next meal. "So, Henry," the reporter asked, leaning forward with a hungry look in her eyes. "The world is dying to know. How did a man from your background, a son of the North End, manage to sweep a woman like Serena Thorne off her feet? What was that first spark like?" I felt Serena's fingers tighten on my knee. "A warning. Stick to the script." "It was a rainy Tuesday," I began, my voice dropping into that low, practiced tone of a man in love. "I was working in my father's old bakery, trying to get the sourdough starter just right. The air was thick with the scent of yeast and warm sugar. The door chimed, and in walked the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. She was soaking wet, her silk scarf ruined by the storm, but she didn't look angry. She looked curious. She bought a simple loaf of rye bread, and as I handed it to her, our fingers brushed. In that moment, the flour on my hands didn't matter. The millions in her bank account didn't matter. There was just a connection, a shared recognition that we were both looking for something real." The reporter actually sighed, scribbling furiously in her notebook. Serena leaned her head on my shoulder, playing the part of the smitten bride to perfection. But the second the elevator doors closed behind the media crew, the mask didn't just slip, it fell and shattered. Serena pushed herself away from me as if I were covered in ash. She stood up and walked to the bar, pouring herself a drink with trembling hands. "A bakery, Henry? Really?" she spat, the romance in her voice replaced by a jagged edge of contempt. "Could you have picked a more pathetic, low-class setting for our love story? I felt nauseous just listening to you talk about flour and rye bread. Do you have any idea how much effort it takes to maintain an image of prestige when my fiancé is babbling about yeast?" I stood my ground, my voice cold. "It's the only world I have that was ever real, Serena. You bought my time, but you didn't buy my memories." "Your memories are clutter," she snapped, turning her back on me. "Pack them away. Tomorrow, the Yamamoto group arrives. If you mention a bakery in front of them, I'll deduct $1 million from your payout. Now, leave. I can't stand the sight of you when you're being sentimental." The discovery happened late on a Tuesday, during a night when the city was swallowed by a thick, gray fog that made the skyscrapers look like ghosts floating in a void. Serena was at a charity gala I had managed to avoid by faking a migraine. The penthouse was silent, the kind of absolute silence that makes you hear the blood rushing in your own ears. I had gone into her private study to find a misplaced architectural file for the Zeus project, but what I found instead was a manila folder tucked beneath her leather blotter. It was labeled in red ink, Project Zeus, Phase 2, Clearance. I opened it, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. It wasn't just a corporate project. It was a demolition plan. To build the Thorne Private Park, a gated garden for their corporate elite, they were going to bulldoze a historic 3-block radius of the North End. My eyes scanned the map, searching for the streets I had run through as a child, and then I saw it. A heavy red X was marked over a small, 2-story brick building on the corner of 4th Street. Jack's Cafe. My breath hitched in my throat. That cafe was the last standing piece of my childhood. After my father's bakery was demolished 10 years ago, the cafe's owner, Jack, my father's best friend, had taken me in. He had given me a place to study while the scent of his daughter Maya's cinnamon rolls filled the air. My father and Jack had carved their names into the floorboards of that kitchen 30 years ago. It was the only place left where I could still feel my father's presence. And now, Serena was planning to erase it like it was a smudge on a window. But the horror didn't stop there. Beneath the map, I found a document titled Disposal Strategy. It detailed the end of our contract. Serena wasn't planning on paying me the $5 million. She had a team of lawyers ready to file a non-compete and patent seizure suit against me the moment our engagement ended. She was going to claim that all my modular structural designs, the work of my life, belonged to the Thorne Group. She planned to leave me with nothing but a ruined reputation and a pile of legal debt. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off the tears I didn't even know were falling. I wasn't just a fiancé, I was a target. And Maya's home, the place that still smelled like my father's friendship, was the collateral damage. The Ice Queen hadn't just bought my time, she was trying to steal my soul. But as I looked at the structural blueprints of the Thorne Tower on the adjacent screen, my eyes narrowed. They thought I was just a baker's son with a pretty face. They forgot that I was an architect. And I knew exactly where the cracks were hidden. I drove to the north end through a storm that felt like the sky was breaking open. Thunder shook the frame of the luxury car, matching the rhythm of my rage. I parked 2 blocks away, not wanting the Thorne Group's GPS to track me to the exact door. As I walked, the rain soaked through my expensive Italian suit, ruining the silk, but for the first time in months, I didn't care. I felt clean. The city noise faded, replaced by the familiar, grounding sound of rain hitting old red brick. When I pushed open the door to Jack's Cafe, the bell chimed, a low, copper sound that vibrated in my chest like a memory. Maya was there, standing behind the counter. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. She was staring at a final eviction notice that had been pinned to the counter with the Thorne Group's cold, gold-embossed seal. She saw my silk coat, my diamond watch, and the way I carried myself, and her face twisted with a fury that was beautiful in its honesty. "We're closed," she said, her voice trembling but hard as steel. "And if you're here from the Thorne Group to tell me the bulldozers are coming early, you can tell Serena Thorne that you'll have to kill me to demolish this. I'm not leaving. My father's heart is in these walls, and you'll have to tear my body out from under the bricks before I let you turn this place into a corporate lawn for people who don't know what a home is." I pulled back my hood, the water dripping onto the worn wooden floor. "I'm not here to evict you, Maya." "Then why are you here, Henry?" she spat, walking toward me until we were inches apart. "I've seen you in the papers. I've seen you smiling next to the woman who is killing this neighborhood. You're the prince of the Thorne Group now. How does it feel to sell your father's memory for a penthouse view? Does the coffee taste better when it's made from the blood of your own people?" I walked past her to the counter and touched a small, jagged notch in the wood near the espresso machine. "My father and Jack carved this notch when they were 20 years old," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "They promised that no matter what happened, this block would always have a place that smelled like home. My father was David Ford. He owned the bakery on 5th Street before they took it from him." Maya froze. The rag in her hand fell to the floor. "Henry? Little Henry?" She looked at my suit, then back at my eyes, her anger turning into a deep, painful confusion. "But, you're one of them now. You're the architect. I saw your signature on the filing for the new park. I signed those plans because I needed to be the one to write the fine print," I said, taking her hands in mine. Her skin was warm and smelled of cinnamon, the exact opposite of Serena's cold, metallic perfume. "Maya, everyone thinks I'm just a lucky nobody. But I've spent 7 months inside their system. I've secretly moved the property lines in the digital land registry. I've tied the Thorne Park deed to a dormant community trust that belongs to us. I didn't just design a park, I designed a legal cage. I'm David's son, Maya. And I'm going to make them pay for every loaf of bread they stole." The next 14 days, I lived a double life that felt like walking a razor's edge over a pit of fire. By day, I was the perfect, silent prop for the Thorne family. I sat through endless tuxedo fittings, letting the tailor nip and tuck at the expensive wool while Julian stood in the corner, nursing a scotch and making jokes about my peasant frame. I sat in meetings where Serena talked about clearing the slums and removing the rot. She had no idea that every time she signed a Project Zeus update, she was actually signing over the rights to her own headquarters. I had used my genius to create a nested ownership loop. On the surface, it looked like the Thorne Group owned the North End. But deep in the subclauses I had written, hidden under thousands of pages of legal jargon, the land ownership reverted to the North End Community Trust the moment the first bulldozer touched the soil. And the trustee was Maya Miller. Every night, I returned to the North End. I didn't bring tools to reinforce the walls this time. I brought my laptop. While Maya baked bread in the back, filling the cafe with the scent of yeast and hope. I spent my nights in the shadows of her basement, finalizing the trap. "Why are you doing this, Henry?" Maya asked one night, bringing me a mug of hot coffee. She sat on an old crate next to me. "You're risking everything. They'll put you in jail if they find out you tampered with the deeds." "They won't find out until it's too late," I said, the blue light of the screen illuminating my tired face. In that penthouse, Serena treated me like a piece of bread, something to be consumed and thrown away. She forgot that a baker knows how to handle the fire. I've spent 7 months heating up her empire, and in 48 hours, it's going to burn. She reached out and wiped a smudge of exhaustion from under my eye. "You've changed, Henry. You're not the quiet boy who used to hide in the kitchen. I'm the man who learned that you can't build a future on a foundation of lies," I said, taking her hand. "The gala is in 2 days. They think they are celebrating a victory. They don't realize they are celebrating their own eviction. 48 hours, Maya. That's all the time I need to show them that a baker's son knows exactly how to protect the hearth." The grand ballroom of the Thorne Plaza was a cathedral of arrogance, glowing with the fake warmth of 1,000 candles. I stood on that stage, dressed in a tuxedo that felt like a costume, with Serena's hand resting on my arm. For a few months, I had been a fool. I had looked at her in the quiet hours of the night and thought I saw a flicker of loneliness. I had started to care for her. I had even thought, for one delusional moment, that our contract could become a reality. But 3 weeks ago, she had reminded me that I was just yeast and clutter. The love I had started to feel was met with cold, sharp glass. Eleanor Thorne stepped to the podium, her voice booming through the speakers. "Tonight, we don't just build a park, we remove the rot. The North End will finally be cleansed of its outdated structures, making way for a garden worthy of the Thorne name." The audience cheered, but I felt a dead weight in my chest. I looked at the back of the room. Maya was there, standing tall, holding a small, old flour bag from my father's bakery, a silent signal that the fire was lit. I stepped forward, gently but firmly removing Serena's hand from my arm. The touch that used to make my heart race now felt like a shackle. The room went silent as I moved to the center of the stage. "Eleanor is right about one thing," I said, my voice resonating with a power they had never heard before. "The rot needs to be removed. But it's not in the North End. It's right here, on this stage." Serena's smile froze. "Henry, what are you doing? Get back in line," she hissed under her breath. "The line is broken, Serena," I said, pulling out my tablet. "You thought you hired a lucky nobody to be your prop. But you actually hired the man who has spent the last 7 months documenting every black deal the Thorne Group has ever made." I hit a button on my tablet. The 80-foot LED screen behind us, which was supposed to show a beautiful park, flickered and died. Then, a grainy video began to play. It was Julian, laughing in a private club, bragging about how he had bribed city officials to falsify the safety reports of the North End buildings just so they could be declared condemned. The audience gasped. Julian stood up in the front row, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "Turn that off. That's a lie. It's a sworn affidavit from your own secretary, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the panic. "And it's only the beginning." I didn't stop there. Julian's scream was just the first crack in the glass. While the audience was still reeling from the video of his confession, I swiped my finger across the tablet, initiating the next phase of the demolition. I wasn't just exposing a crime, I was stripping them naked in front of the very people they tried to impress. "The chaos you see now is just the surface," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd like a knife. "For years, the Thorne Group has crushed small businesses, bribed inspectors, and evicted families to keep their stock price high. But you can't build a skyscraper on a sinkhole." I hit the next command. The video of Julian vanished, replaced by a scrolling waterfall of numbers on the giant screen. It was a live feed of the Thorne Group's offshore accounts, the black fund Serena had used to dodge taxes and hide the money she had stolen from the architects she had ruined before me. I looked down at her. She was frozen, her face pale, watching her secrets spill out for the world to see. 4 months, I tried to find the woman I thought you were, Serena, I said, my voice amplified through the speakers. I actually cared for you. I thought the Ice Queen had a soul buried somewhere deep. But you reminded me, every single day, that I was just clutter. You told me I smelled like yeast. Well, Serena, the clutter is taking out the trash. I hit the final command. The screen turned a stark, warning red with the words, Notice of Total Insolvency. As of 5 minutes ago, I announced, addressing the investors who were now clutching their phones in panic, Phoenix Holdings, my company, has bought 40% of the Thorne Group's debt and called in the margins. You don't own this building anymore, Eleanor. You don't own the land. You don't even own the champagne in your glasses. The Thorne Group is bankrupt. Julian, realizing his life of luxury was evaporating, tried to lunge toward the stage. He's a liar. Arrest him, he shrieked, his face purple with rage. But the security guards, the same working-class men Julian had insulted, underpaid, and treated like dirt for years, didn't move to help him. Instead, the head of security stepped forward, his face grim. He grabbed Julian by the arm, forcing him to his knees right in front of the stage. The prince of the city was now kneeling in the dust of his own broken pride. I watched as the room emptied. The elite she worshipped, the socialites, the bankers, the politicians, were fleeing the room to avoid the scandal. Serena looked around, realizing that without her money, she was invisible to them. She stood alone in the center of the floor, her dignity crumbling in real time as the world turned its back on her. The noise of the crowd faded as they fled the scandal, leaving the ballroom eerily quiet. It was just the wreckage now. I turned my attention away from the fleeing investors and looked at the woman standing amidst the debris of her life. Eleanor Thorne had collapsed into a chair, but Serena was still standing, her silver gown torn at the hem, her makeup ruined by the first real tears I had ever seen her cry. She looked up at me, and for the first time, the mask was gone. She wasn't looking at a prop or an asset. She was looking at the man she had underestimated. Henry, please, she whispered, her voice cracking in the silence. She took a step toward the stage, reaching out a trembling hand. We can fix this. I can change the contract. We can be partners. Real partners. You said you loved me. You said I was beautiful. I looked at her hand, the same hand that had pushed me away after the magazine interview, the same hand that had signed the order to destroy Jack's cafe. I felt a ghost of the pain I used to feel, but it was quickly replaced by the cold clarity of closure. I loved the woman I hoped you were, I said, leaning in close so only she could hear. I thought the ice was just a shield. But it wasn't. It was all you were. You're just a brand that went out of style, Serena. But the money? She pleaded, glancing at the ripped contract in her hand. 5 million. You could have had everything. You never understood, I said, a sad smile touching my lips. You thought you were buying an architect. But you were dealing with a son. You didn't just take a bakery, you took a father's pride. You can't put a price on that. I reached out and took the contract from her shaking hands, the document that had started this nightmare 12 months ago. Slowly, deliberately, I ripped it down the middle. Then again. And again. I let the white scraps fall onto her expensive silver shoes like cold, dead snow. There is no more contract, Serena. And there is definitely no more love. I turned my back on her. The sound of my footsteps on the stage was the only sound in the room. I walked straight to the back of the hall, where Maya was waiting in the shadows. She didn't have diamonds. She didn't have a crown. She just had a warm hand and a heart that didn't have a price tag. Henry. Serena called out one last time, a desperate, broken plea. I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. The ovens are cold, Serena. The shop is closed. We walked out of the plaza and into the cool night air of the city. Behind us, the massive neon lights of the Thorne logo flickered, buzzed, and finally went dark. The empire had fallen, and I finally felt free. 6 months had passed since the Thorne empire collapsed, and with it, the cold, suffocating weight of my old life. The headlines had stopped screaming my name, and the city had moved on to newer scandals. I stood in the quiet of the renovated cafe, watching the morning light filter through the steam of the coffee machines. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I wasn't wearing an Italian suit today. I was wearing a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up. My hands weren't holding a gold-plated pen or a legal contract. They were holding a warm mug of coffee. I was no longer a prop. I was no longer an asset. I was finally just Henry. The bell above the door chimed, a soft, melodic sound that always made my heart skip. Maya walked in, her face glowing from the morning air. She didn't look at me the way Serena used to, scanning me for flaws or checking if my tie was straight. She looked at me with an intensity that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. Throughout the revenge, throughout the chaos, Maya had been the only one who didn't want anything from me. She didn't want my money, she didn't want my genius, and she didn't want a story for the press. She had simply sat with me in the dark when I was broken. She had healed the parts of me that the Thorne family had spent 7 months trying to kill. "You're staring again," she teased, setting a basket of fresh flowers on the counter. She walked over, her presence bringing a warmth that no penthouse fireplace could ever match. "I'm just making sure you're real," I whispered. She reached up, her hand cupping my cheek. Her touch was soft, grounding, and honest. "I'm real, Henry. And so is this. No more masks. No more contracts." I took her hand and led her to the window, looking out at the neighborhood we had saved together. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Inside was a ring that didn't have a giant, cold diamond meant to show off wealth. It was a beautiful, delicate band of rose gold with a single clear stone that caught the morning light. "Maya," I said, my voice thick with an emotion that felt like a long-awaited homecoming. For a year, I lived in a world where everything had a price tag. I lived with a woman who thought love was a transaction. But you loved me when I had nothing but a broken heart and a secret. You treated me like I mattered before you knew I could win. Maya's eyes filled with tears, bright, happy tears. She didn't say a word about the billions I had moved or the power I now held. She just looked at the man standing in front of her. "I don't want a 12-month agreement, Maya. I don't want a contract that expires," I said, slipping the ring onto her finger. "I want to wake up every morning and know that the person next to me loves me for the soul I tried so hard to hide. Will you stay with me? Not because of what I have, but because of who we are together." "Always, Henry," she whispered, pulling me into a kiss that tasted like hope and the start of a real life. As we stood there, held together by a love that was pure and unbound, the city continued to move outside. But inside these walls, the foundation was finally solid. The contract was over. The revenge was finished. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Hope is the life.